Hello and welcome to another episode of Boring History. My name is Angela and for today's episode we're going to be having a look at the Nachzehrer, which the most simplest description of is a type of German vampire. And as you may or may not have noticed, I really tried to dress in accordance with the theme of today's video. Whether or not I succeeded is probably a question best left unanswered. Anyway, the Nachzehrer is not the only type of vampire that you find in German folklore. For example, there's also the Neuntöter. And the Neuntöter is said to be a vampire that rises after being dead for 9 days with the intention of spreading the plague. This timeline of revival also explains its name, as the name Neuntöter means 9 killer. But look, honestly, you don't have to worry too much about this type of vampire because you can stop them from even coming into existence by simply putting a lemon in the mouth of the dead. Which brings us back to our Nachzehrer, which is predominantly found in the northern part of Germany, which includes the state of Bavaria and some of the surrounding areas. This type of vampire is said to be born under the light of the full moon, and it enjoys munching on its burial shroud, and once that's gone, it starts nibbling on its own arms and legs. Let's just say there aren't a lot of dinner options when you're buried 6 feet under. Now, it's been said that this creature makes so much noise as it's chewing on itself that you can actually pinpoint the location of a Nachzehrer in its grave by the noise alone. So if you ever want to go vampire hunting, all you have to do is go to a cemetery and be quiet. Don't do that. And whilst we're on the topic of things not to do, it's said that if you exhume a body and the corpse is sleeping with its left eye open whilst holding its thumb, you've actually exhumed a Nachzehrer. Now, there are a few different ways it's said that a person can become a Nachzehrer. One way is apparently if a baby is born with an intact amniotic sac, then that child is destined to become a Nachzehrer. Which is actually quite a terrible belief to have had, because you can only imagine what would have happened to these perfectly healthy and normal babies that had the unfortunate luck of being born this way. Scenario number 2 of how to become a Nachzehrer is if relatives happen to be on the stingy side and forget to place money in the mouth of the deceased. Because obviously in this scenario, without their pocket money, the deceased can't progress in the afterlife, and so, with nothing better to do, they come back to annoy the living. And finally, it's possible for a person to become a Nachzehrer if his or her name isn't removed from the clothing prior to burial. So if you're burying someone, make sure to check for name tags. This final name tag check is particularly important if you're burying a family member, because the Nachzehrer has a very distinct way of luring its prey. It's said that a Nachzehrer is able to contact family members on the astral plane, where it's able to lure them all the way back to its grave so it can feast on them. Or sometimes it's said that the Nachzehrer can send out spirits onto the astral plane, where the spirits can then drain its family members on its behalf. Nachzehrer are a little bit different to your more common garden variety of vampires, because unlike other vampires that you may have heard of, they don't remain in their grave because they can be killed by sunlight. Rather, they remain in their graves because they're smart, and they know if they go prancing around in the neighbourhood in broad daylight, there's a pretty high chance that somebody is going to come along and chop off their head. See, just because you're dead doesn't mean you lose the power of rational thought. So in other words, the Nachzehrer is more of a upper management type of vampire, because it's very rare that they actually leave their grave, as they'd rather have all these little spirits running around the place doing the dirty work for them. It's actually also a good thing that Nachzehrer don't like to go wandering around the neighbourhood, because it's said that if a Nachzehrer's shadow falls on somebody, then that somebody will die. However, if a Nachzehrer does rise from its grave, or its tomb, I guess, depending on its social status, it's usually for one of 2 reasons. Firstly, because it's feeling peckish and it wants to go and nibble on some of the other dead people in the... some of the other dead people in the graveyard. And look, honestly, why not? I mean, it's not like the other dead people are doing anything productive with their time. The second occasion in which a Nachzehrer will rise from its grave is if there happens to be a female revenant around who has died in childbirth. Does anyone else always think of Wynonna Earp whenever they hear the term revenant? In case you're not familiar with the term, revenant is based on a French word which means one who has returned from death or after a long absence. A lot of the time the term is used in conjunction with vampire, however, not all revenants are vampires, as the term can be used to describe anyone who has died and then risen from their grave. Jesus? Back to our Nachzehrer. If the Nachzehrer happens to bump into a female revenant who has died in childbirth, the two of them will generally go for a little stroll and ring some church bells. Why? Because it's said whoever hears the bells that are rung by the Nachzehrer will be doomed to die. But even in this instance, the Nachzehrer doesn't like to make too easy of a target of themselves, and it's said that they have the ability to transform themselves into pigs. So when it's scouting around for church bells with its newly made female revenant friend, this is the form it takes. A pig. Can you imagine if Dracula was said to transform into a pig instead of a bat? Like, how much less scary would that whole franchise have been? Or maybe more scary. If you're ever unlucky enough to come across a Nachzehrer, the way that you kill, well, not really kill, the way that you defeat them is through decapitation. And then you have to make sure that you rebury the head and the body separately, otherwise they will reattach and the whole cycle just begins again. Another way it's said that you can prevent a Nachzehrer from rising or sending out its little spirit minions is by breaking its neck, leaving it some food so it has no reason to go out looking for snacks, removing the burial shroud, and sprinkling it with some rice. Apparently, the rice keeps it occupied in its grave, as the Nachzehrer is magically compelled to count each and every single grain. 20 points if you can write in the comments which other myth involves rice and counting. But do you know what? Nachzehrer aren't all about work and food and spirit minions. Sometimes, just like you and me, they like to go out for a bit of light stress relief, sneak up behind two cows and tie their tails together. Why? Because it's hilarious. And with that fun fact out of the way, we reach the end of today's video. Thank you so much for joining me. Please feel free to leave your favorite vampire down in the comment description below, and maybe consider subscribing because I look forward to sharing even more boring history with you in the future.